We're, we're about to go on live. Good night.
Well, we are on live, actually. Oh, God. And I'm sure Mrs. Renata's running upstairs now to make you a nice glass of chocolate milk for you. We'll have all of that and so much more tonight as nice weather moves back into the eastern United States. Where else? But can you just
Give me the phone.
Enjoy
Give me the
full
phone.
family on the Joe and Joe Weather Show? Brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware.
True Value Hardware, yes.
At 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, in Southwest Suffolk County on Long Island, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, tri-state area. And don't forget, in just a matter of weeks, we'll be dealing with snow and ice somewhere, and you might need rock salt to help get it all cleaned up. Still time to do some fall landscaping, and still plenty of time to get the things you need to make sure your home could stand up to adverse weather. And 10 years ago, we were waiting for what was to be the powerhouse of Hurricane Sandy up the East Coast. And this is just a gentle reminder that it's good to be prepared. 631-756-1125 for the best prices in town. And, of course, the website, as we all know, is
OmniTrueValue.com. Joe, thank you.
Hang on. I have to fix you here. Hold on a second. First of all, I have to annoy Sal Blandino and move you back to the other side. Then I got to get rid of me, so this way we don't get the circle of death. And now I can bring me back. Did you say goodnight to Mother Rayo?
Yes, I did. I said hello, and got maybe one or two more words in before the executive producer came in and started jabbering away at me. She was very upset, Joe. Before Joe and Joe tonight, the folks over at Fox Weather asked me to come on their air to talk about the eclipse of the sun that occurred a couple of days ago and about the lunar eclipse that's going to be taking place a week from this Tuesday on Election Day morning. And I wore my glasses. I don't normally when I did television regularly, I didn't wear my glasses, and normally when I do Fox Weather, I didn't wear. But I wore my glasses tonight. And
what's the big deal? You wore your glasses. I wear glasses all the time.
The executive producer said she didn't like the fact that the glasses were down like on my nose here, and that you can't see your eyes when you're wearing your glasses. And blah, 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 blah. And so she takes the phone. She takes the phone out of my hand and then proceeds to tell my mother and my sister about the events of the day today. Yes, yeah. And I got. My mother is 90 years old. She's not around for too much longer. Just to say hello to her. And then he handed the phone back to me, literally, when we started the show, for me to say, "Good night, Mommy."
Why don't you get Joe? First of all, I think you look fine with your glasses, just so you know. But you should get one.
Joe says I look fine with glasses.
But what he should get, though, Renata, get him one of those chains. You know how the old women at Woolworths used to have their glasses on a chain, and they would never, and they would lift them up, and they would never wear them while they were doing something. But if they had to look, if you asked them how much something cost, they would bring the glasses only up to their nose, and they would do this.
Get me a chain, like the old women and old men.
Upstairs.
Good. I'll start wearing a chain. Maybe I'll get a chain and put it around your neck. That's.
Oh.
You realize that worldwide witnesses.
Yeah. Like tomorrow, you're going to see me on the headline on the news. Weatherman wraps chain around wife.
God.
The phone is ringing. It's protect my. Look at this, Joe. We get these these robocalls. This is. I don't know what that is. Protect my what?
Well,
I don't know.
I'd protect I'd protect myself in your shoes right now, because
Exactly.
when this show is over,
And this show
you're
is
gonna be
going to
hung
come.
out to dry.
Exactly. Precisely.
Well,
Whatever.
uh, since we are coming up on the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, it just happened this morning. I went on WPC's. I pulled up the old surface map just to kind of remind me of a few things. And this was the map that I have up, Joe. This is from the date being today, the 27th. So this is Saturday, October 27th of 2012, and what was going on at that stage. And I had a Facebook memory come up because I had a conversation with Bill Goodman. I forgot all about this, but just talking about how Sandy was going to eventually become extratropical and become this monstrous extratropical storm. And I called it a noricane, which is a cross between a nor'easter and a hurricane.
Right.
And that's kind of what happened. Now this is during the day, these 2 days before, and the surface map. What was unusual about this? Well, I just lost it. Hold on a second. What was unusual about this is from the position that it was at that Saturday. Okay, and this is the 27th. Okay, hang on a second. I accidentally jumped to where we are. During the day on Saturday, it was moving northeastward away from the Florida coast. And, in most of the storms that do that, they just keep right on going northeast. But if you take a look to the west, running up and down the Appalachian Mountains, and then even further north up into upstate New York, and we could even take that even further up into Canada, there was almost a straight line stationary front that ran from eastern Canada, basically from Montreal to central PA to western Virginia, all the way down to the Florida Panhandle, and it just it moved out to the northeast. Now we're on to we're I'm going to move it along here. It moves out to the northeast, and it actually got, if I remember correctly, it actually got east of 70. Did it get east of 70 and then turned back to the northwest? So this is Sunday on the 28th, and it just about gets to 70 degrees west. So this is early Monday. This is Sunday evening on Monday, October 29th, and that's where it just makes this turn toward the northwest. And see on the surface plot. This was really the nightmare scenario for the Jersey coast, but north of where the center made landfall, and for Long Island, and for New York City, and taking a storm and having it come in from the southeast, because this was really in the years that you and I have been around, okay, which is a long time, from, let's say, our professional years. So let's say from the late 70s up until now. So we're talking 42 or 43 years. This is probably the only tropical storm that I could think of that actually took a track like this to come in from the southeast.
And you're right. In fact, I somewhere in my archives, and maybe I don't even have it anymore, I remember reading a paper that was written, and it was like the worst case scenario for the New York City metropolitan area. And that worst case scenario was a storm taking a track just as Sandy did. But how many of these storms, 99 out of 100 of these tropical systems have always taken a track parallel to or up along the Atlantic seaboard. We are so used to seeing a storm, let's say, near Salisbury, Maryland, moving northeast past Atlantic City, on up toward Montauk, eventually reaching toward Cape Cod. That's the track. That has always been the track. And we've always had, in storm situations like that, gusty or strong east or east-northeasterly winds. And this storm, Sandy, took a track that made landfall, as you just saw with Joe's not animation, but hour-by-hour movement. The storm came in from the east and south and rammed right into south central New Jersey, and we had not north or northeasterly or even easterly winds. We had southeasterly winds. This was a real sou'easter, if you will. And because of that southeasterly flow, the water just literally rammed right up and over southern sections of Long Island, came right into lower New York Harbor and flooded everything out in lower Manhattan, and it was horrible. And that's exactly what this paper that, again, I don't remember where it is. I do remember reading it though, and it stated in the paper that storms do not normally take this sort of track, but it's certainly not an impossibility. And this was one of those cases where, and the reason why I believe, even to this very day, the reason why the European is referred to still by some as the king of model guidance is because of the way that the European, only the European, handled this storm. Most of the other model guidance data indicated that the storm would take a track out and up and away from the tri-state area, not make landfall or anything. But for, I think, like 5 days in advance, the European started curving the storm inland across New Jersey or the mid-Atlantic area, and eventually the other models caught up with it. And everybody said afterward, you said, my God, that European model, that's the model I'm going to be looking at from now on. And it has lasted. And of course, the European has had its drawbacks over the last decade or so, in especially during the wintertime. But everybody, just simply remembering how it handled Sandy, always now say that the European is their model of choice as far as events, especially major events that may be upcoming. So those are some of my memories about Sandy, Joe. And the other thing I remember about Sandy is leaving for work on that Monday midday and actually stopping in my driveway and looking around. My house is surrounded on 3 sides by 50 to 75-foot trees. And I'm looking at these trees, and I looked up at the sky and I said, please, please, I'm willing to take 5 days of no power. I have a generator. I'm willing to take no power and whatever else you want to throw at me, so long as you just don't have a tree land on the roof of my house. It was the first time in all the years, and even to this date now, of all the years I've been forecasting, over 40, was the first time that I ever left for work absolutely frightened out of my mind about what could happen or might happen. And I'm thankful that nothing hellacious happened on my property or on my home, but there were a lot of others who were in and around my neighborhood that were not, unfortunately, so lucky. And what an amazing time it was with Sandy 10 years ago. I can't believe it's already been 10 years.
One of the things that among so many, I could just remember, at least from about 5 days before, with the upper air the way it was. You had a full-scale blocking pattern. You had this deep cutoff low that was dropping down into the wrapped up Tennessee Valley, this upper low, which, by the way, took another 10 days before it finally pulled out, which led to an early season snowfall. I would go ahead and call it, for
right.
a small area, a small geographical area, was a snowstorm. They actually had to close schools over on parts of Long Island for an additional 2 weeks in some places, because the snow, some places getting as much as 9-10 inches, but there was no equipment to clear it. Particularly off rooftops, there was no equipment to clear it because everything was being devoted to Sandy cleanup, and that led to more power outages.
That was the day after. That snowstorm came the day after Election Day, and of course all of that coming in the aftermath of Sandy. Where I was working, News 12 Westchester, there were 2 things on the high priority list. One, especially at election time. On election night, everything concentrated on the elections and the polls and the results that were coming in. But also important to us was weather. And this is something, my news director was like shaking her head and saying, I don't know what to go with first, because a big snowstorm potentially was coming our way the very next day, and we want to warn our viewers about that. And yet all of these election results were coming in as well. And it was the first time. Normally on election night, I just sit around all through the night. They bring in food. I could just relax for 5 or 6 hours while we concentrated on election coverage. Not that night. Not that night. As if it weren't enough that we were put through heck during Sandy. Now here on election night, I'm running up and down, in between election results. And now here's Joe Rayo with the big snowstorm that's coming tomorrow. And I'm saying to myself, I can't believe we're doing this. I can't believe that we had a hurricane or a tropical weather system that did so much damage to us less than 2 weeks ago. And here we are now talking about the first significant snowfall, the first major snowfall of the season. That was a wild couple of weeks, Joe.
Yeah, it really was. And I'm just, while you were talking, I was just trying to see if I could find an upper air map somewhere to illustrate what was going on. And unfortunately, I can't. But what's kind of interesting, again, just going back to that stretch of weather and everything else that was happening, and there must have been other things that were going on leading into that, and I just remember, you get this sense of, after it's over with, if you've never experienced a tropical system or something, a storm like this, where you see, when I went out the next morning, it was funny because where I lived in my development was kind of in this protected, I don't want to call it a sinkhole, but sort of a little bit of a valley where I lived, because I had the elevated spine of Long Island that was just to what my south. And I could tell you stories about, I have told stories about rain changing to snow with the 2013 big snowstorm that followed up just a few months later. But that little spine actually, in a way, protected where I lived in my little development. We got strong winds, make no mistake, but we did not get some of the big wind gusts that they got maybe just a few blocks north of me. And from there all the way up to the North Shore. So I basically, when I went out the next day, the amount of trees down, the amount of damage, trees through car windows, it was something that I had never experienced. And of course, there was no electricity. We had no gasoline, so had to figure out ways to go to gas stations on foot with gasoline containers, and they were hard to find. But I had a connection at a store where my friend of mine, and he said, "Listen, I got 4 gas cans, 4 or 5 gallon gas cans. I'm holding them for you." So I went over and got them, and it was really worked out quite well. But it was an odd experience. It was surreal for about 10 days, and all I could think of after we had the snow happen, I thought, well, what's next? The only thing that we haven't had is locusts. I mean, that's really the only thing. With everything that we went through with the hurricane, then the snow afterward, is like, okay, what's next now? You feel very vulnerable. You think all of a sudden now it's just going to be one disaster after another, and then, as you just said, 10 years go by.
It is hard to believe that it has been 10 years, and it's amazing. I think back about all of the devastation, all the damage that was done by Sandy. I mean, I'm talking, for example, Jones Beach, the famous Jones Beach Theater, had to be completely revamped. There was tremendous damage there, and tremendous damage to the boardwalk, and every which way you looked. And I guess that's the reason why it got the nickname Superstorm. In fact, Brian Norcross, the famous hurricane expert down in Florida, I think he was the one who came up with the nickname of Superstorm Sandy. And by the standards of some of the other storms that whirled on by here over the last 40 or 50 years, Sandy really was not all that significant in terms of wind. The storm wasn't even a hurricane anymore. It was,
I would disagree. I would completely disagree with that. I really would.
Well, I mean, the central. I mean, you look at the central pressure, and you look at the winds around the center of the storm, the sustained winds around the center of the storm just before landfall, was like 75 miles an hour, and that was nothing.
And I understand that, and I understand that, but you had a 944 pressure, which I think is the record, making landfall. But what wound up happening was the fact that as it became extratropical, Joe, it just the gales all spread out. Sort of what in a way, Fiona, when it went into Nova Scotia, the you no longer had the 100 plus whatever it was, 115, 120, whatever it was. Yeah, you get the winds. The top winds were only 70 to 80 miles an hour, but we had sustained gusts of 60 to 80 miles an hour for hours and hours and hours. And I had to. My parents who lived in Westchester, I had to actually bring them from Long Island because the damage in Westchester was far worse. And as bad as it was on Long
Right.
Island with the trees, I was
Right.
astounded at the damage when I drove to pick them up and bring them to my house because they had no power and my father wasn't feeling well at the time, and I had to bring them to my house. And I was one of the few people that didn't lose power. No, I think from the standpoint of adding everything in terms of the impact, and of course coastal flooding was so huge with that. Um, this was about as bad as it gets, Joe. We're not going to get it. We're never going to see a full. We'll probably never going to see. I don't want to say never, but I mean, I guess a 38 style hurricane that's moving up at 60 or 70 miles an hour. Um, I don't know if we'll ever see that in our lifetime. Let's hope we don't. But this one to me was about as bad as it could get.
Well, it's interesting you say that because what I would like to do, if you allow me to share, is to play you not the whole report, and this is actually just a snippet of a report that I did for News 12 about 10 years ago. And I did an interview. I went to the National Weather Service forecast office at Upton and spoke with Jeff Tung, who was their science person out in the National Weather Service office, forecast office out there. And actually, Jeff Tung went to school with Renata. They both graduated with atmospheric science degrees from Oneonta College, and Jeff went on to work for NOAA and the National Weather Service. And I interviewed him for a special, two-part special we did on News 12, and we got around to talking about Sandy and what were the possibilities or what was the prospects of having another Sandy. So if you give me the control of the
you have it.
Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn my headphones off because in order for me to do this, in order for all of you to hear this, I'm gonna have to go off of my headphones. But hang on for a moment while I make all these corrections. I just started doing this as soon as you were talking about Sandy and the prospects of having another one. Now,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, very good. And now what I'm going to do is I'll share the screen so that everybody can see this. Technology, Joe, technology. Here we go. Share. Go to there like that. Can you see what I'm seeing right now, or I'll make it I'll try to make it full screen. There you go. All right. So this was from a two-part report I did on. Actually, it was on climate change and global warming, but the conversation did eventually get around to Sandy, and here is part of the interview I had with Jeff Tung at the National Weather Service. And with all of this modern technology, the debate rages on. The general consensus of the meteorological community is that climate change seems to be less of a factor in the short-term, day-to-day aspects of forecasting.
Just because what you're seeing happening here in, say, Westchester County, you can't say that that's directly related to climate change. But when we look at it on a big scale, what we're seeing is heavier rain, warmer temperatures in the Northeast.
On a worldwide scale, climate change could make for more potent nor'easters and tropical cyclones, but not necessarily increase their frequency of occurrence here in the Hudson Valley.
We may not see another Sandy, hopefully, for at least another 50, 100 years. We know that there will be storms like that in the future, but we can't say it's going to happen this year, next year, or in 20 to 50 years. It may be a whole century before we see a storm again like Sandy.
So that was the opinion of Jeff Tung, that hopefully it'll be a very long time before we see the situation come back and possibly provide us with another storm like Sandy. Certainly don't want to ever see something like this again in our lifetime, because it was indeed one for the books. And I agree with you, Joe. The storm system was devastating to portions of southern Westchester. For example, Rye Playland, Rye Amusement Park, the adjacent beach, Rye Beach, was absolutely and totally demolished by those gusty and strong east-southeast winds and that tremendous storm surge that occurred. We were near a full moon, for goodness sake, at that time. I mean, it was like the perfect storm. Anything and everything that could have happened with this storm did happen with Sandy.
Can you put your headsets back on?
Yes. Hold on.
Because I get feedback from your... There we go. Now the feedback's gone, so we'll just wait till Joe puts his headsets on. There you go. Okay.
Hello.
Yep, I hear you. Yeah, because then I get the feedback in my headsets, and it gives me a big headache.
Okay.
So, one of the things you talked, Mr. Tung said something that just kind of reminded me of what just happened with Ian, because the climate, let's call them the climate zealots, the climate obsessed, went after the current head of the Hurricane Center because so he was on, I don't know if you know about this, but he was on CNN talking about Ian and what was going to happen, what was happening and everything else, and they asked him a question about climate, and correctly so, he told them, look, I'll be glad to come on anytime and talk to you about that and have that conversation. This is not the time or place to have that conversation. We have a hurricane making landfall. We need to. I'm here to save people's lives. And you know what? He was exactly right. And I was just thinking about the fact that was 10 years ago, and what Jeff Tung said. I just wonder if he said that now, he would probably have those, obsessed zealots. And I'm not. This is not about climate change and saying it's whether it's real or it's not real. It's about courtesy. It's about speaking and having conversations with a civil tongue, which apparently a lot of people aren't capable of doing anymore. But that kind of struck a chord with me, because I remember when with what happened with Ian. I forgot to bring that up, but this was a perfect opportunity to bring that up. And yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen again. One of the things, something else that was part of the conversation with regards to Sandy. I'm going to bring back that surface map to just kind of get into a little bit of the technicalities here with the system, and whether it was a tropical system or a not tropical system. Look, here's the bottom line. The declaration of this being a non-tropical system making landfall was actually a good thing for the people who have homeowners insurance, because it no longer was a landfalling hurricane. Okay, so the way her insurance policies are written now with these hurricane deductibles, if you get a hurricane, your deductible may normally be, say, $500 or $1,000 or $1,500. Well, now it becomes 10% of whatever the value is of your home. So now you're faced with a $50,000. If you have a $500,000 home, you've got a $50,000 deductible, and so you got to eat the first $50,000 worth of damage before your insurance comes in and takes care of the rest. But if you so it was a good thing, it was post-tropical at that time, because if you look at the circulation, for one thing, when it's a hurricane, the circulation's very, very tight. Okay, we talk about gales maybe going out 150 miles, maybe 100, 150 miles from the center. I mean, we had gale force wind gusts well inland. You can just see how with the isobars here, which are drawn about every 4 millibars. This thing already had spread itself out like a non-tropical cyclone. And then you look at the environment. In a tropical cyclone, it's a tropical environment with tropical dew points on all sides. Well, if you look on these observations, it was in the low 30s in West Virginia. It was in the low 30s in western Virginia. These areas had people forget that there were parts of West Virginia that got clobbered with wet snow. We're talking about 1 to 2 feet in some of the mountain
Right.
areas there.
Right.
In Pennsylvania, if you look at the OBS here in Pennsylvania, we're looking at, for example, the Scranton OB here at before landfall in Atlantic City is 52 with a dew point of 50. If this were truly a tropical system, these dew points up here would have been at least into the 60s, like they were in southern New Jersey, like they were down in Delaware, for example. But at this point, it became quote post-tropical. But you know what? From the standpoint of the experience of what the storm wound up providing, it didn't really make a difference. And fortunately, because we've got these, there's been these conversations with Fiona, for example. They made it post-tropical as it was making landfall in Nova Scotia, and the fear is that they say, oh, it's post-tropical. That means we don't have to worry about it anymore. And I forgot who I was speaking to about this, and that I think someone was to some official. They were talking to some officials of some sort where it was discussed that the storm was going to become post-tropical, and one of them responded by saying, "Oh, then it means we don't have to worry about it anymore." No, not at all.
No.
It's it's a technical thing for us weather people, okay? But this will forever be remembered as Sandy, whether you want to call it a hurricane or a tropical storm or superstorm, whatever it is, whatever it was. It was one for the record books for sure.
Now, is that an important fact for people who had insurance, where you go to your the folks who cover your property or your policy or whatever, and they're looking for, or you're looking for, hurricane. This definitely was a hurricane that did damage, and they will turn around and say, well, no, not exactly. It wasn't a hurricane anymore. It was a post-tropical weather system. So you're not going to get as much, or you're not going to get anything.
No, it was no, Jay, it's the other way around. So in other words, if it had come in as a hurricane, the hurricane deductibles kick in, which means that instead of you paying the first $500 or $1,000 or the fifth, whatever your deductible is on your policy, okay, if you lived on Long Island, because I had a hurricane deductible, and I don't even live on the coast. I live 10 miles inland. The hurricane deductible, if it's a designated hurricane when it makes landfall, okay, then the insurance company will say it's a hurricane. It was a hurricane at landfall. The damage was caused by a hurricane. Therefore, your deductible now is no longer $1,000 or $1,500, whatever it is, but your deductible is 10% of your home's value, which at the time would have been for me about $40,000. So I would have to come up with 40 grand, and I really had very little damage. I had a few shingles, and that was it. But so when they made it post-tropical, the insurance companies had to pay on those policies. They couldn't exercise the hurricane deductible anymore. So that's why the designation, but the designation was important.
Right.
And it wasn't like, there wasn't some veiled conspiracy by this. We got to make this post-tropical because the insurance companies are going to have to will have to pay for the bulk of the damage. But it was post-tropical when it made landfall. So that's just again, it's a technicality, is all it is.
And so many of the insurance companies, I guess, they fell behind in paying people. In fact, Christiopedia points out so many people fought for years for their insurance money. So it was something. It was, as I said, this is another example of a perfect storm. Anything that could have gone wrong for so many did.
Yep. All right, so let's just run through the weather real quick tonight, because there really isn't a whole lot happening. We do, however, have the exact opposite of what we were looking at 10 years ago today. It's nice up and down the eastern seaboard. We had a gorgeous day. And the weather looks like it's going to stay nice probably through Sunday. I don't see any problems. Joe, even on Monday for Halloween, I threw in the chance that there could be a couple of showers, but it just doesn't look all that impressive to me with regards to Monday and the next weather system.
Well, that's good for all the trick-or-treaters. Maybe it won't be necessarily a showery rain or a steady rain or even a steady drizzle, but maybe a shower or two here and there, a period of dry weather, and then maybe a few more scattered showers, but nothing that will keep the trick-or-treaters away from doing their thing on late Monday afternoon, Monday evening.
Yeah, here's a close-up view of the east. By the way, the system that's going to be developing off the Florida East Coast, it doesn't look all that impressive to me at all. It still looks more like a north-south frontal boundary where you got this the moisture feed that's coming out of the Caribbean and going straight north up the Atlantic and east of Nova Scotia. So I'm starting to wonder what, if anything at all, we're going to see out of that. And the models have really backed off on the system in the Eastern Caribbean. So, we may not even get any. Neither of them could wind up being a named storm, which, you know what? That's a good thing. Radar-wise, a bit as quiet as you can be east of the Mississippi. We do have some downpours and one or two thunderstorms moving through parts of Kansas right now into Nebraska. Also a bit of severe weather down in northwest Texas. You can see a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings there, and some snow in southern Colorado and parts of northern New Mexico, and that's that next low that's coming in. This came into the Pacific Northwest a day and a half ago, and now we have another system coming into the Pacific Northwest and bringing some heavy rains up into northwestern Washington. But the vast majority of the states here are quiet, 7-day rainfall amounts. Here in the east, we're looking at basically a quarter of an inch or less, except for a couple of pockets of a half inch in New England. The Gulf states, the lower Mississippi Valley, parts of the Tennessee Valley, looks like they could get anywhere from a half an inch to maybe as much as 2 inches in some places. And, hey, the West, Joe, looks like with the trough in the West, WPC's got significant rains of an inch or more all the way down to San Diego. We haven't seen that in a long, long time.
Well, I guess then it's good that the World Series, which will start tomorrow in Houston, will not be starting in San Diego. Although, as I see on this QPF map, Joe, the Houston area is going to be getting its fair share of rain too over the coming next 7 days. But that doesn't make a difference because in Houston they don't have a dome anymore, but they do have a roof that they can roll over. So let it rain, let it do whatever it wants. They will be able to play in Houston in spite of that. Even though Aaron Boone was upset about the fact that they left the roof off for Game 2 of the playoffs, that seemed to bother him, or he said it bothered his team. I don't understand.
Wouldn't have made a difference anyway.
Well, anyway.
Snow-wise, very little going on over the next 72 hours. This is a probability of at least 2 inches. Just a little bit up in northwestern Washington, and some just low probability of at least 2 inches in parts of New Mexico and southernmost Colorado. This is a very, very small area here. So from that standpoint, it's going to be quiet. So just really quick, let's just run through the upper air. There is, predominantly now we're in this sort of west to east flow with a tendency for ridging to be here in the eastern part of the United States. Actually, most of the country is going to be on the warm. Well, we're going to be on the cooler side because of what's going on with the high to the north. But it's a mostly west to east zonal flow. The real cold air flow from Canada is temporarily cut off. And then you see this big trough that drops down into the western part of the United States next week. Which is why WPC is doing what it's doing. And that trough goes all the way down into the Baja Peninsula and into Arizona. So it's a fairly impressive system. And meanwhile, we'll have ridging in the east for the first days in November. And then eventually, Joe, the models seem to be consistent with the idea that late in the forecast period, right around after the 10th of November, deep trough returns to the east and kind of an interesting upper air. I love the long range. The long range always, after about 300 hours, always puts these really juicy looking upper airs for the eastern part of the United States, especially when you get into the winter months. And then, more often than not, they don't come to materialize. But we've been talking about the fact that maybe around mid-month, with what's going on in the stratosphere and a few other places, and perhaps a recurving typhoon, that we could ultimately wind up with a cold pattern, a colder than normal pattern after, say, the 10th or 11th of November. And there's nothing that takes me away from that idea from what I saw today.
Well, for all of you storm lovers out there, and for all of you who are into dynamic or active meteorology, take a look beyond 300 hours, especially on the GFS, and it's nice to dream, isn't it?
Oh,
I
yeah,
saw earlier.
Here's the surface. Yeah, okay. There it is. So, yeah, there's a front with a little wave on it, some snow for New England, and a pretty decent shot of cold air late in the forecast period.
So there you go.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I noticed that earlier on the chat board, when we were talking about Sandy, that our dear friend Mr. Tom Contino said, well, he said, I love storms like that. And all of a sudden, about 6 people on the chat board ganged up on it.
Yeah. Well, he's coming at it from the angle of an enthusiast, and I understand.
And we were all like that. We were all like Joe and I. We used to get very upset if we saw a hurricane turning away from the Mid-Atlantic coast, or turning away from the possibility of making landfall somewhere near New York City. He said, "Darn it!" That was when we were kids. That's when we were in our 20s. We're now old men. We're in our 60s now, and we have family to look after. Or we had family to look after, and we have property to think about, and insurance, and everything else, and going through long stretches possibly without power. So these are things you don't think about when you're a youngster and you're looking at this and hoping for a storm to come right at you, as opposed to where we are now, having gone through more than our fair share of storms. We have gone through the wars, so to speak, and I don't know about you, John. I'm done with it. I'm done with tropical systems, and I'm even done with snowstorms. I'm done with everything. If I could just have nice, dry, quiet, tranquil, no stormy weather for the entire year, that would be just fine with me. But again, for all of you youngins out there who are getting excited about potential big storms, or wanting to get into the field and are waiting to see a major stuff, I can understand your enthusiasm, but
yes,
you will learn like we have learned over the many, many years that these systems, it ain't fun. I remember telling a guy who was like in his, he's gone to his reward now, but I think he was probably in his 70s. And this is, I was in my 20s, and I was expressing the opinion that, oh boy, I wish we'd have a storm. I wish we'd have a major system, a hurricane, maybe a tropical. And he looked at me and he gave me this deadbeat look and saying, why do you wish something like that? What is it with you? What are you, a weirdo or whatever like that? Why? I don't understand this. Why do people like you like this sort of thing? And it's in general, when we had storms back in the 70s and the 80s or whatever, you'd hear from somebody saying, well, the weather people, they love this kind of thing. It's like, yeah, they enjoy this. They love disaster. They love this. And I might point out that reporters in the newsroom, they'd sit around in the newsroom all day typing and waiting. And you know what they'd be waiting for? A fire. I think that's the one thing that a reporter wanted to cover more than anything else were fires. May have been devastating for the people who own the house, may have been a real problem for the neighborhood, or whatever, but still, they love to go out and cover a fire, just like we used to love covering major storms. But now, again, you get old, and your whole outlook on these things changes with the passage of time.
No question.
So will yours, Tom. Tom Contino, so will yours. Maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, or even next week or next month or next year, but sometime down the road, you will be changing your thoughts about major storms, hurricanes, and nor'easters and the whatnot, and then you'll be thinking about Joe and I, and what the wisdom that we're imparting to you right now, or at this moment.
Chris O'Shaughnessy, I think for safety reasons they should have kept it a hurricane. I get the fact that it was a. Well, look, Chris, the thing is that the point that they made it post-tropical was right before landfall anyway. So it's not like all of a sudden everybody was just going to, we're talking about literally a couple of hours before landfall. So in terms of the timing, it didn't make a difference. I think the message was delivered correctly by since most people get their weather off TV. Um, the message was delivered in a way that it would not have impacted people's not all of a sudden not taking it seriously. The people who didn't take it seriously, by the way, were some of the politicians like Mayor Bloomberg days before, who said some pretty ridiculous things until he finally was made to realize that this was a very serious situation. So it was those people you really should take to task, because the weather people were saying almost in unison 4 or 5 days before that this was going to be a big deal. Okay.
Right.
So it was the politicians who put their fingers in their ears like they usually do, because they're basically all gas bags anyway.
First of all, Bloomberg was a moron from the start, not just for Sandy, but if you remember the so-called Boxing Day blizzard of 2010, where he was out having fun in Bermuda while New York was getting 1.5 feet of snow. Then when he came back, here the streets are clogged with snow. Nobody could go anywhere because the plows didn't get out on time. And what is he doing? He's telling everybody, go out, enjoy yourself, go see a movie, go see a Broadway play, come on into New York. And of course, nobody could get anywhere near New York because of all the snow. But the one thing that I still remember was when a reporter asked him, Mayor Bloomberg, would you have declared a snow emergency during the height of the storm or after the storm? And Bloomberg said, no, I wouldn't. What a buffoon. What an absolute buffoon.
Yeah, it was the day after Christmas. That was his one saving grace, because if it had been regular work day, they'd be having a totally different we'd be having a totally different conversation here. By the way, I just want to acknowledge Leon Probitsky hitting a super chat. Also, the chairman Scott Briller hitting super chat, remembering how the roller coaster at Seaside Park or at Seaside Heights was basically lying in the ocean during Hurricane Sandy. And as you said about Playland. The Jersey Shore, of course, was crazy. And Brandon Doherty earlier hitting super chat. Let me just really quick. I'm going to run through just the GFS surface, and then I got to go because we lost power here today. I had power out for about 6 hours.
Wow.
We had a big tree come down, take down the main power line, and they had to actually get a helicopter to come. And the tree was so big that they cut it into a small enough piece that had a helicopter take it out of the area. I've never seen anything quite like it. So it's a pretty straightforward outlook here, folks. We got a big high in the east. It's wedged in down the Appalachians. The ocean low on recent model runs, and judging from the satellite, I kind of agree with this. I don't know if we're going to get much of anything that's going to develop out of that, and who cares, because it moves out to the east anyway. The system to the west is going to produce rain through Texas and into Louisiana tomorrow and into Saturday morning. But as it lifts northeastward, it just kind of falls apart and weakens. So maybe on Halloween there could be a couple of showers running around, but there are going to be some places on Monday that may not see a drop of rain out of this. And then it's quiet weather for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Flow gets a little onshore-ish at the end of the week. We'll have to see end of next week. We'll have to see how it plays, and that takes us into the first weekend of the month of November. So, on that note, Mr. Rayo, I think we should say goodbye. Because with that power outage today, there was a few things I had to take care of, and I still have to take care of them. So we'll save the second half of Briller Jeopardy for for Monday, because I think on Sunday, Mrs. Rayo, assuming that she hasn't, you know, liquidated you
Kill,
between now and then.
kill me, kill me.
You know, I'm so afraid to say things like that because I think some algorithm is. I keep coming in my mind that an algorithm is going to come and say that I was advocating violence or something. You know, it made you. They've just. God, it's really crazy. All right, everybody.
If that be the case, Joe, then every rerun of the Honeymooners on YouTube would be off completely because of that. I mean,
Well,
you know, they could never do it. They can't do it. They can't do a sitcom like the Honeymooners today in today's day and age, because there's no way in the world that you could have the husband tell the wife, one of these days, you know, one of these days,
bang,
pow,
zoom,
bang, zoom, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, you put it up on Facebook, they get thrown into Facebook jail. That's how stupid the world is right now.
Right.
So anyway,
right.
that's as political as I'm going to get tonight. Everybody, have a great Friday, a great Saturday, and a great weekend. Sunday we'll be back at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. So we're going to have a night show on Sunday, not at the 11 a.m. So we'll be at 7 p.m. Okay, so write that down. Say good night, Joe.
Good night, Joe.
Good night, Joe.